Hey everybody, welcome back to part 4 of the RPG tutorial series. So let's just get started right away. And the first thing that we need to do is when you open up the scene, this may or may not be true for you, but some of the different objects that we worked on last time are now hidden. So what that means is we just need to actually go through, and if I double click there you can see that this foreground loads back in, but we have a lot of work to do where we actually need to change the background and these different elements to different positions. So let's actually just change background's Z position to 1. So now it will actually be located in the background. So if something like the slime here is in location 0, and then these rocks here are in location 0, then that's completely fine. So, perfect. The next thing that we need to work on is actually doing something that's important for the future. So you can see right here that we have a square collider on our hero right here. And that's great and all, except sometimes what will happen is if you collide with something else that has a straight line, it can create issues. So we actually are going to want to remove this component and add a circle collider here. And then what we can go ahead and do is the same thing we did before and just make the circle collider in a good spot, which would be just right at the bottom of the object. So we just need to go in and move it there, which is it's a little bit hard to work with, but yeah, we just need to make it smaller, and then maybe make it up a little bit more, and then a little bit smaller, and then you can just go in and set the X offset and the Y offset to exactly what you want it to be. So we can see here this actually needs to be negative, so we can do negative 0.08, I think, and then an X offset of 0.01. So something like that should be pretty good. So now the collisions will be a little bit better for this game. Now the next thing we want to do is go into the cameras and look at the camera border. So if we go in here, we can see, well, it's kind of hard to see, but there's actually 4 different points that we want to have in order to make this a square, and right now it's actually 5 different points. So if I click right here, what we can do is we can go to one of these edges and press Control and left click in order to get rid of the edge. And now if you can see, which is a little bit hard to see, there's actually only 4 edges now, which makes a square. I'll just move it out here so you can see it clearly, and then we can move it back in. And in the future, of course, if we have a complicated scene, maybe we don't want a square, we actually want a different shape, so you can just go anywhere and then drag off of it to add another new edge, but for now we just want a perfectly sort of shaped square. So if I zoom in there, it's pretty much straight all the way around, which is what we want, except this edge could be up a little bit more. Alright, perfect. Okay, now our next step is going to be adding an idle animation. So let's click on Game Assets, into Sprites, RPG, and then all the way into Gabe's folder, which is our main character in the game right here. So the first step is going to be renaming these assets to what I have here. So I have Gabe Run here again for the controller, and then Game Run Anim for the animator. And then what we can go ahead and do is press Control and D right on Gabe Run, and this will make a copy of it, and then we can rename it to Gabe Idle. Alright, perfect. And then when we click here on the sprite editor, what we can do is we can see that we have the same running animation that we had before, but now we want to change this to be just an idle animation. And one way to do that is to just make him look like he's moving back and forth a little bit, not really running. So I'm clicking delete on these different frames that we don't really want, and yeah, then we can click apply right here, and that will make this idle animation work. So in order to actually have those animations and controllers, we can just drag the character onto the screen, and then we can call it Gabe-idle animation. Alright, perfect. So it just auto-created those things for us. And I'm gonna set a -Z so we can actually try looking at it when we play the game. Okay, so you can see we have a basic look going. You can see it doesn't look good at all right now, but we're going to fix that and actually like slow it down and everything like that. So I'm just going to go back here and delete it, and we can continue on with what we need to do. Alright, what we want to do next is take the Gabe run that we had before and rename it to just Gabe Animator, because this is just going to be sort of the default animation controller that we're going to be using, because these specific ones we have here don't really matter. We just need to have one, not all of these other ones. But if you double click on it, what will happen is the animator window will open up. And so you can see here that there's a Gabe idle run animation right here, which is, it has the name that we gave it before. So that doesn't matter too much, but what we can do is then we can actually drag in the Gabe idle animation right here. And this is a state machine, so how it'll work is whatever states we give it, it will actually be able to play those states for us, and the animator will automatically switch between those states. And we will see that in a little bit, but first you can see here there's just the entry, and it goes from the entry into the default state right here. So this is the edge between the two vertexes here, and what we can do is we can make our own transitions just by clicking make transition right there and adding them. And yeah, so we can just start by clicking play and seeing kind of how it works. So then I'll click on the hero, and what you can see is that right now it's actually super quickly going back and forth between those states, which you see is creating this kind of issue right now. So we actually need to fix that. In order to fix that, what we need to do is we can add some parameters to help us decide when we need to switch between the states. So there's a lot of things that we need to do here, and I'm just going to get started. The first thing is click on this edge, or transition if you want to call it, and then unclick the has exit time. We also want to do that for this one. So basically we want the transitions to be instant between these different states. And then for the Gabe idle animation, we actually want the speed to be more like 0.1 because it's an idle animation, so we want it to be a pretty slow animation. Alright, the next thing we can do is add a bool that says is moving. So what this means is if the character is actually moving around, then we want is moving to be checked, so we want it to be true. And then if it's true, we know that we kind of need to be in this running state. Alright, in order to actually make this parameter work though, we're going to have to go back to doing some code. Okay, let's go back to that script that we made before and try opening it up. So the first thing that we're going to have to do to make this work is add a private animator and call it animator. So just like with the rigid body before, we have to have a variable for it, and then we can access it through using get component, and we can get the animator component. Alright, perfect, but this should be capital. And then down here we're going to add some more code, but first I should comment this. Now that we're adding a lot of different logic, we just want to have this be the sprite renderer logic, and then below it we want to have the animation logic. Alright, so how this works is these numbers are somewhere between 1 and -1 for the horizontal and vertical movement. And so what we can do is we can see if we're moving, and if we're moving then we want to be showing the running animation, and if we're not moving then we'll be showing the just idle animation. So in order to do that, we can use some math right here. So I'm going to take the absolute value of the horizontal input. So if it's like negative 0.5, then it'll just be positive 0.5 after it goes through this function. And then we also want to do the same thing for the vertical input. And we want to see that they're not equal to 0. So if they're not equal to 0, then we want to actually change that Boolean value. So usually in code, you can just directly say this variable equals true or false, just like we did here. But the animator actually has its own special properties, and so because of that, we have to use an actual function called setBool. And then we access it just by using a string, just like that. And then we can just say else if, in fact, the number does equal 0, so it's not moving, then we want is moving to be false in that case. Alright, perfect. Everything looks good for that. So let's just wait for it all to load up. And I'll just move that over there. And let's see if it lets us run without any errors. So actually it's not working right now. And that's because I added this Boolean, which, let me move the animator over here so you can see. You can see that the Boolean is working correctly. It's being checked when I'm moving around. But the problem is the states, or the transitions here, aren't set up correctly. So I have the transition, but I never added the condition right here. So let's just add an isMoving condition. So it starts on run, and then if isMoving is false, then we will go through this transition into the idle state. And then the opposite will be true here. Or so I should set true right here. So if it's true that we're running, then we want to go here. And the reason that we set these exit times is just because we want this to be instant. We don't want to have to wait until the entire animation is done playing. So now let's take a look at this. Okay, so you can see that he's sort of just standing there waiting to move, and then right when I start moving, it looks pretty good. And then right when I stop, it goes back to him being in sort of an idle state. Alright, perfect. We now have a character that's starting to look pretty good. And you also got a basic understanding of how to use the animator in this tutorial. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.